honest relationships, we need to make sure that we're putting ourselves on our to-do list. So today, we're putting ourselves at the top of the to-do list. We're going to make sure that we get the information that we need so that we can be empowered and we can grow. So I want to thank you all first for just showing up, for blocking off this space and time to just be poured into and to get the answers to the questions that you may have. Because the world will give you answers. Google will give you answers. But are they sound answers? Are they biblically based? Are these the ones that will encourage you to thrive and to go to the next level in your walk with God and in personal relationships? Are they just going to tell you what everybody else says and what everybody else thinks you need to hear? So can I be transparent? I'm not going to do that. Are we all right with that? Just kind of wave at me. Just wave at me. Okay. I want to make sure I'm in the right place because I found myself in a place where I was on this journey and I had question upon question upon question about my marriage, about my children, trying to figure out what was acceptable and what wasn't. And was I even wrong for feeling this way or having these feelings? Pardon me, I have notes, but I really just want to have a conversation right now. So I got to put all that stuff to the side. Is that okay? Just wave at me if it's okay. Okay. Because as a woman, we have so many emotions. We have so many things. You know, we wear so many hats. Sometimes we forget. We have difficulty discerning which hat to put on when. And we have everything going on at the same time when we're trying to figure out, Lord, why am I feeling this way? And God's like, take some of that stuff off your plate. I didn't put it on your plate anyway. Because we have such a passion in our heart to serve others. But it's okay to serve yourself. You are just as important and you are just as valuable. And it took me a long time, can I say long time, to learn just how valuable I am to God. Because I recognized my husband's value. I recognized my kids' value, but I didn't recognize my value. So today we're going to learn a little bit more about our own value and how important we are to God. Is that okay? So what I want to preface is this. This is so amazing. This LEAP conference, this is a no judgment zone. I'm not here to judge anybody because I'm imperfect. I'm an imperfect being. But what I do know is along this walk, along these past 27 years with my husband, this year we'll be celebrating 23 years of marriage. Praise God. You know, I was that one that came from the family of generational curses. Grandfather at 94 on his fourth marriage. Not judging him, but it kept happening over and over again. My husband's family, this person married 3 times. This person married 2 or 3 times. We didn't know what a positive relationship looked like. So, of course, I automatically excluded myself. But can I tell you, regardless of how you feel, God can use you and your imperfections. So I wanted to take some time today just to share with you a little bit about that. So make sure that you understand this is a safe zone. If you have questions, make sure that you answer them. Don't leave here with your questions unanswered. I'm not the only one on the panel. We got a panel of phenomenal women, and we're here to pour in like never before. I want to make sure when you leave, you have the answers to the questions that are in your heart. When they started praise and worship, and I was just thinking about the fact that God was saying it's time to release some things. We got to relinquish control to him because there's so many things that we're trying to control in our own flesh. And he's saying, if you just give it to me, let me handle it. Let me do. I'm the author and the finisher of your faith. I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. So who you gonna trust? Your own flesh, or are you gonna trust God? And that's what we had to learn to do. And as a woman, it took me a long time to do it. So some of you might be listening and maybe wondering, what does this have to do with me? And it has everything to do. As a woman, do you recognize the level of impact and influence you have? Do you guys recognize that when we open our mouths and start speaking into the atmosphere, we shift things? You know, the Bible says we can decree a thing and it shall be established. So as women, as wives, as moms, we got to learn to control what's coming out of our mouth. Be mindful of what we're speaking into the atmosphere. Be mindful of what we're speaking over our relationships and over our marriages. So today, we're going to be talking about just time to have a refreshment on the marriage you prayed about. And let me preface it with this. Just like a lot of people in my family, I didn't know what a good marriage looked like. But what I did know is that I didn't want mine to look like what I had seen. I recognized it wasn't healthy. Make sense? I tried things my way. And I fussed. And after a while, I just had to give it to God. And it's funny, we all have this plan. And I listened last night. We talk about the type of person we want. So I want every woman that's in here to just think about whether you're married or if you're actively waiting, actively dating, or you're married. Think about what your mindset was for who you were going to be with. And for those of us that are married, the person that you married, did they look anything like what you had in mind? Not just the physical attributes, but the spiritual attributes, what God had for you. Because if I can be totally transparent, this is our safe zone. I was the one that was like, look, I don't want no preacher, no pastor. I don't have time for that. I was one of those that's like, no, time out. I'm not one of those. That's not for me. And I was just like, I went about my business. They were going to be in medicine. They were not going to be teaching. They were not going to be preaching. I told God everything that I did not want. And what did God give me? An amazing husband who's in ministry, who is a teacher. Because God's not going to always give us what we want. He's going to give you what you need. And the reason why I'm telling you this, because we're going to talk a little bit about it later, because sometimes we don't understand what God is doing until a little bit later on. It's like, oh, God, now that makes sense. Now I understand my connection to this person. Now I understand why I went through that situation. Because sometimes it doesn't make sense. And God's like, just trust me. I've got it all under control. But we have to be willing to walk through that process. So let's go. And they said we could be transparent, so I'm going to be transparent. Let me know if it's getting too real for you. Just put a chat box and say, I can't handle this too much. just let me know. But suffice it to say this. Some of you are maybe out there wondering, how do I have these conversations? When you're dating, when you're actively dating, actively waiting, you have conversations with a fiance or a boyfriend, and you're wondering, how do I go about this? Because there are things on my mind, and I want to approach the situation, but I don't know how to do it. So I want to give you some tools and strategies. I hope you have a pen and paper with you, because I'm all about teaching, taking tips that you can use now and start applying so that you can see the results in your relationships. Because I'm about results. I love going to amazing meetings, but what I love is walking away with tools that I can apply right then and there. Now, one of the things that's so powerful about this conference, and I love Dr. Stephanie and every member on this committee, is the power of prayer. And I mentioned this to them before. We can have our own plan and agenda, but God's agenda has to be the one to prevail. And that is what is so key. Because sometimes we have conferences just to have it. But when it's God's agenda, lives are being changed and people are being impacted. And that's the entire goal of this entire conversation. So when you're thinking about having these conversations with your fiance, your boyfriend about your relationship, be mindful. One of the key things, and I'm just going to be straight up, avoidance is just not going to work. Sometimes you're in that relationship, you're in that stage where you have the butterflies and you're just so excited about being together. Oh, he's so cute. Oh, he's calling me. We're spending time together. But he starts to do things. Certain things start to manifest. And we start to sweep those things under the rug. They make comments and do little things. You might turn your head a little bit to the side and kind of wonder, like, where did that come from? But you keep going. You sweep that under the rug and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going until these things start to escalate. So I'm coming up I have this plan that my husband and I have in regards to helping people that are having difficulty with these conversations because we need to have them. We're just coming out of a pandemic. The levels of domestic abuse have skyrocketed, and those are only the ones that have been reported. So let's be mindful. There are plenty out there that have not been reported. But how many of these things did we allow to sweep under the rug? Be mindful. We got to use wisdom. When we're going to these conversations, number one, preparation is key. I mean, how many women in here do we have that are business owners? Or you're in corporate America, you work a 9-to-5 job. So when you do that, you have to be prepared when you go into meetings, correct? You have to be mindful. Okay, you don't go into these meetings all willy-nilly with any kind of tone, any kind of behavior. You come in with a goal to get a solution to a problem, if that makes sense. So the same thing with our relationships. When we go into when we have these conversations, we need to be prepared. It could be something minute, but you understand, you don't just go to your boss with just any little thing. If you're going to approach your boss because there's a lot on the line, you're going to use wisdom on how they approach them. Make sense? So you got to do the same thing in your relationship. So let me give you some keys that you can utilize when you're going to have these challenging conversations. Because a lot of times it's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it. Different, same words, but different method of delivering it that makes all the difference. So let's look at it. First of all, you got to establish some boundaries or some ground rules. What are you saying, Dr. Sakeisha? A lot of times when we go into conversations, they're challenging conversations. We just want to go in, have the conversation because as women, we've got our emotions. We want to get this off our chest. For those of us that are, really outspoken, we're like, hey, I just want to talk to you about something. But number one, you got to set a time and a place. Yeah, you do. You need to set a time and a place. Why? Because you want to have these conversations, number one, uninterrupted. Number two, you want to have them in a place where there are no distractions. What do I mean by distractions? These cell phones, social media. I mean, when you're trying to have a conversation with someone, do you want them checking their phone the whole time? Do you want them checking their email? Do you want them posting on social media? Just think about it. You see a lot of stuff going on social media. Just click here. And I'm like, okay, you're on a date, but how much time and attention are you giving to your date? Are you spending more time posting pictures so everyone else can see what's going on in your life? Number two, you need to make sure that you're writing down what your concerns are. For women, we can say a lot. We can multitask. We can go from A to Z. And that's something I had to learn in the marriage, is to learn to be led when I'm having these conversations. Before we went to these conversations, of course, I go into my prayer time with God, which means you can't rush into these conversations because there's certain things it's like, okay, God, how do I handle this conversation? What do I need to say to him? How do I need to say it? And some people may be saying, are you serious? Yes, you do. Because God knows what's on the heart of the person you're going to speak to, and God knows how they're going to respond. But he's the one that can prepare you when you're going into these conversations no, we're not even going to talk about that right now. Timing is everything. So make sure that you, one, establish these boundaries, meaning there's no distractions, no interruptions. There's a level of respect that we got to have if we're going to refresh these relationships and have these challenging conversations without it blowing out of proportion, meaning making sure that limit it to 1 to 2 things. Let me be real with you. Some men, and I'll use my husband for an example. After I talk about 2 or 3 things, he's zoned out. He's like, look, you can't tell me 10 things and expect me to respond to all 10 things. I may only remember 1 or 2. But if we can narrow it down to 1 or 2 things, the top 2 things, that's what we had to learn, is so that we could focus and hone in on those 2 things. You know why? Because now I have his full attention. 2, he's dialed in. I got his attention. He's got my attention. We have no distractions, no TV, no cell phones, no interruptions. And then after that, once we present it, we also put it in writing, because some people are auditory. They can hear it and they get it. Some people are visual. They need to see it written down. Do I seem like I'm doing double work? No, not if you're trying to get the result out of the relationship. You got to do what's necessary. Each person has their own learning style. And then once you present that, you have limits in terms of maybe 30 minutes. Because as a woman, let's be real, we could talk about one thing for about 2-3 hours. And he's just sitting there in and out. Like, are you serious? I have no idea. After a certain period of time, we've lost him. Maybe it's just my husband. I don't know. Maybe it's just my husband. But then after you each have time to present what your concern is in regards to that topic, then you each come up with 1 or 2 solutions how to handle it. Why are we doing that? Because it's important. You know how you hear people say everybody has to have skin in the game? Everyone needs to be contributing. There are so many times as women, we feel that things are one-sided. I'm doing everything. I'm doing the cooking. I'm doing the cleaning. I'm resolving the issues. I'm handling X. I'm handling Y. But when you include him in the conversation and his voice is heard, he's feeling respected. He's feeling like, oh, I'm contributing to this relationship. I'm valued. Both of you are contributing to resolving the solution. That way it's not one-sided. And then after that, you agree on what progress or what solution you're going to implement first. So that means you're on a path to moving forward. If you're dealing with sex, if you're dealing with your finances, if you're dealing with your communication, if it's dealing with issues with your in-laws or outlaws, as some people refer to them, you can make sure that both of you, the two of you, are active participants in relationships. When you are having a challenging conversation, if there's conversation, meaning I'm talking, you're listening, and vice versa, and then we're both contributing, it increases the likelihood of you coming up with a solution that's going to be beneficial. Versus you sitting there talking for 2 to 3 hours, getting everything off your chest. He's overloaded, has no idea because he's zoned out after 30 minutes. And then you're back to square one. So how long are you going to do that dance if you want that resolved, if that makes sense? So that is one of the key things. So who is this conversation for? If you're a wife and if you ever wondered, how do I stay married when I want to leave? If you wondered, how do I talk to them about finances? How do I talk to them about our sex life? How do I have that conversation that the sex life may be painful? And yeah, we're going to talk about that too. What if I feel that our sex life isn't meeting my expectations? It happens. How do I prevent past abuses from impacting my marriage? Because as women, we've been through something. When you go into a relationship, both people are carrying baggage from their past. So how do you prevent that past baggage from going with you into your future? And that's a huge thing. And even you might have questions, or for a woman, you might be listening, wondering, well, where do I go from here? I'm married. I've been married for a long time. Life is good, but he could improve he could improve in our sex life. He could improve in communications. He mishandles the finances. If any of these questions are swirling around in your mind, then this conversation is for you. And I'm so glad that you are here. Now, you may have seen a lot of the advertisements, but one of the things I do want to say, if you are actively waiting, you might be feeling, okay, Dr. Sakeisha, you're addressing the married folks. Well, no, if you're actively waiting or actively dating, I have something definitely for you. And it's called, I want you to get clear. And as we make sure you write that down, CLEAR, the acronym CLEAR, because we're going to be talking about that. Because CLEAR applies one way to our actively waiting or actively dating, and it applies differently to the wives in the room. So just write that down. Make sure that I get clear. And just put a pin in that, because that's a really, really important topic. Let me go here. So, who am I? I've been with my husband for 27 years. This year in August, we'll be celebrating 23 years of marriage. And I'm celebrating myself because that's something that, according to our family history, would never have happened. We came from a history of divorces. So besides being a wife and a mom, I'm a retired pharmacist. I'm an author, a speaker, and a radio show host. And thank God, God opened a tremendous opportunity. This fall, we'll be launching our own TV show. Now tell me, God isn't amazing. He could take a woman who came from a family history of divorce and use her to pour into other married couples. A woman who struggled with self-esteem issues at times and use her to be an author, a speaker, and to encourage and influence people. So please hear me. If you're a woman listening to this, a wife, don't put God in a box. Don't limit what he wants to and can do through you, in you and through you. And like many of you, many of the women out there, I have questions about marriage, about relationships. Am I doing this right? And if I could be honest, at one point in my life, I was like, God, just what the heck did I get into? Did you not see this? Did you not see what he said? Did you not see what he did? And it's so amazing. Let me share something with you so you can understand why I'm really, really passionate about this. I'd say, within like the first 5-6 years of our marriage, I told you guys before, what I didn't want was somebody who was in ministry. For some reason, I was just like, no, that's not me. And lo and behold, I connected with my husband in school and found out later on that was one of his callings. So in the middle of the night, we were having one of our heated debates, AKA arguments, a nice way to put it. And he looked at me and he said, Sakeisha, you need to go pray. And I looked at him like, are you kidding me? What do you mean I need to go pray? No, you need to go pray. And I said, suffice it to say, that went back and forth. And I went into my bathroom and I began to pray. And when I went in there, you guys know, God knows our heart. So I kept going into the bathroom, and I was going in there arguing. God, did you see him? Did you see what he said? God, you gave him to me. God, you're going to fix him. God, you need to tell him this and that. I'm like, you told me to go pray. So in my mind, this was prayer. No, I was having a conversation, but I was pretty much having a conversation with myself because you guys understand a conversation is a two-way street. We talk and then we listen, right? God loves me because God really had to be patient with me going through that phase. And he was like, look, after a while, I got quiet and I ran out of complaints. And once I stopped complaining, that's when God started doing the work. Because we had to recognize we cannot change anyone. Only God can change someone. And little did I know while I'm in there going to God, talking about my husband, God's handling my husband at the same time. I had to learn when I had my conversations with God, one, if I wanted to see some changes in my marriage, if I really wanted to see some things, I had to learn to start praying instead of complaining. Prayer instead of complaining. So the next time that you are tempted to complain, okay, let me go to God and see how I need to handle this situation, because it can be difficult for us as women because we get frustrated. We carry a lot of things. But I started talking to God and God said, look, everything, he knows that's his child. He knows everything about my husband. But there were some things in me that I needed to work out. So that's when God started doing a work in me, when I started listening to him and hearing his voice. God started showing me. Has anyone ever, you know that we have these mirrors and we like to check ourselves out, ladies, when we're going somewhere. But what about when we're holding that mirror up to our face when God is talking to us and what we see, that reflection is not what we thought it was? God will start to show us the things and the imperfections that we have on the inside of us that we need to change. So instead of spending all my time saying, God, deal with him, I noticed I was pointing that finger at him, but I had 3 fingers pointing back at me. And that's when God started doing a work in my heart. And I started to come to God differently, because as God started to speak, I had to be quiet enough during that conversation to listen, to hear God's heart in regards to my marriage, to hear God's wisdom in regards to how to even approach my husband with these conversations. So remember that outline I gave you not too long ago, talking about establishing the boundaries, talking about, how to write down what I'm feeling, how to limit it. Because remember, I was handling things my way. But when I really wanted results, when I wanted to see a change, I had to handle things God's way. And when I started doing that, ladies, can I tell you, our marriage began to shift, that there was a change taking place. And I can't tell you the things that happened after that. When I started listening, God started talking to me and reminding me of my attitude, the things that I had done, whether intentionally or unintentionally, that had inflicted harm on my husband, and how I needed to start talking to him with a different level of respect that I had been, that even though I didn't feel that he deserved it, that was his child. And for God, he wanted me to respect my husband and honor him, even when I didn't feel like it. Think about it. There are times as we don't do the right thing, but God still loves on us. And he wanted me to demonstrate that same love and grace to my husband as his wife. And that's a challenge. So for many women out there, we have strong personalities. So we had to learn to be tempered. And it was in that moment that God started doing a work in me to help me to be able to more effectively minister to him in love. So after I finished those times in the bathroom, for which at first I was resentful for, I eventually had to be grateful for those times. Because from that point forward, when I came out of the bathroom, my husband had been in a separate room. And little did I know, resentment had grown in my heart because he was excelling in ministry. He was doing his thing. And I was mad because I had to work. And I'm like, God, well, you don't love me? I can't do what I want to do in ministry. It wasn't my season. It wasn't my time yet. And I was taking that out on him. But when I came out of that bathroom and my husband met me at the door, he took me by the hand and he said, let's go over to the house, to the couch. And I'm like, oh my God, I think I went too far this time. And he said to me, he said, Sakeisha, look, I wouldn't be a true man of God if I'm serving in ministry, I'm helping the pastor, I'm doing everything I can for everyone else, but I'm letting my own household be in chaos. So whatever we got to do to work this out, we're going to do it if we have to stay up all night to do so. So I was like, look at God. And for someone, I got mad because he told me to pray, but he actually blessed me when he told me to do that. And it's so amazing. God is always speaking to us as women. Are we always listening? There are times where we don't want to do things, but if we just get in God's presence and hear his voice and his instructions on how we're to handle things, some of the battles that we're fighting, it's like having the answers to a test, but just being unwilling to open it up and look at it. How many of you can you imagine just having the keys to your dream home dangling in front of you, but you just don't want to put it in the lock? And that's what I was doing. God was wanting to do some amazing things in me and through me, but I had to listen and I had to trust God to handle for him as well as for me. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate, because I saw what God did in my life. Me, for someone who didn't know what a successful marriage looked like. And I'm not saying my marriage is perfect. As we continue to talk, I'm going to be transparent with you about some of the challenges that we've had, as well as some of the challenges that the clients that we worked with. But I just wanted to remind you how amazing God is in those moments where we just settle ourselves down long enough to hear his voice. And so if he's going to do it for me, I know he'll do it for you. But the thing is, we just got to make sure that we're willing to listen. So like I said, you know what? Have you ever had any of those thoughts like, Lord, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, there have been times that I felt like, Lord, I don't know what's going on. But after those moments, God was like, he's steadily showing himself. He's just showing up how amazing he is, showing how he's got everything under control, showing how we can trust him in the process. And I'm excited about this conference because these conversations are very necessary. I wish these kind of conversations were going on in my household, or had an atmosphere that was a safe zone where I could remove the mask, take off the makeup, pull off the hair, and just say, look, I just need to be me. I just need to be poured into, and be okay with that. So many times we feel that we have to be strong, that, we can't have those moments where I'm struggling. And then, like for some reason we're perfect beings. No, we're not. There are things that we go through in life, and they're meant to help shape us into the people that God is calling us to be. So don't judge your life, or don't judge your marriage by the chapter that you're currently in. You have the ability to turn the page. For those of you that are watching virtually, you know what? If you're in the situation in your marriage, if you're in one of those seasons, you're like, look, I got to turn the page on that. I can't stay stuck here. I remember being one of those wives, always angry, always bitter, always frustrated, until I allowed God God, you got to help me with this. So I want every woman that's in here that could be struggling, take a piece of paper and just write down some of the things that you may have been struggling with in your relationship or in your marriage, and ask God, how do I handle each and every one of them? Because God is always speaking, but are we always listening? Now, I want to share with you guys one of my aha moments in marriage. But I wanted to ask you guys, just be real. Or, if you want to do it virtually, you're like, I don't want everybody to know. Because it's really, really important as women. How many of you in here have had a challenge in a relationship? It's okay to raise your hand. You can raise it virtually. Because there are things that are going on in our lives, and we need help. Sometimes it's painful, because it's like saying I have an imperfection. And God's like, look, I want to help you walk through that, because there's going to be purpose coming out of that pain. You're going to turn around, and everything that you've learned in this moment, I'm going to turn around and use you to bless others. Be it one person, 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. But you've got to learn. We got to learn to raise your hands and be like, look, I'm struggling in this area. God is starting to teach us to stop trying to do things in our own flesh, and allow him to be the one that is that determining factor. Let him be the one that shows you how to successfully navigate these situations. Also, be mindful that we as women have to be mindful as who is speaking in your life and who's qualified to do so. Because we are, as a heart for women, we love to go to, how they say, mom and them and sister and them when we have an issue in our relationship. But you have to be mindful about who you are encouraging or allowing to speak into your life, and are they qualified to do so? That's one of the lessons that God was teaching me. He's like, you got to establish some boundaries in your relationship. You're allowing, in-laws and all kinds of people to influence your decision. Remember, he said the two of you in Genesis, he said that the two of you become one flesh. I believe it's 2:24. The two of you leave your mother and your father, and you cleave to your husband, and the two of you become one flesh. Which means when God is putting the two of you together, that's when we have our wedding rings, it's that circle, it's that covenant. But why are you allowing so many other people to get into your covenant? That covenant is between you, your spouse, and God. Now, I'm all for having a trusted advisor, a pastor, or a counselor to speak to. I got it. But perhaps, let me just be real with you. If you are married and you are struggling in your marriage, perhaps going to your friend that may have been divorced 3 or 4 times, that may not be the person that you go to for help. And my thing was sometimes you don't want to hurt people, you don't want to offend people, but you got to guard your marriage and use wisdom. Now, my question to you is this. Are you ready for the tough conversations? Because there's some things that we do in our relationship. We're saying that we have challenges. I have women that will message me, they'll DM me and say they have questions, they have concerns when it comes to their relationships. But are you honestly ready for the tough conversations? Because remember, your relationship, that's a partnership between you and your spouse. So the key for these tough conversations, you got your pen and your paper, let's get into some teaching moments. I call them the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps. Number one, before you go into those tough conversations with anyone, be it your boss, especially your husband, pray. But not only that, pray daily. Find scriptures to stand on. I've had women that come to me and they'll say, well, I do pray daily, but I don't pray like such and such. It's not about competition. It's about establishing the relationship with God. Find a scripture to stand on and cover you and your spouse daily. I mean daily. Before they leave the house. If you can, get with them and pray a couple minutes in the morning, depending on your schedules. If not, if nighttime works better for you, each couple has to figure out what works best for them. But stay covered in prayer. I'm telling you, God will open up these channels. Sometimes we're blocked because we're not really seeking God for answers on how to handle everything. We're just running to whoever's available, whoever our best girlfriend is at the moment, and just talking and putting all your business out there. God's like, wait, I'm waiting here. Anytime you want to consult me in regards to your relationship, I'm here. But we're running to everybody else, and he's standing there waiting with his arms wide open. It's like, look, I'm ready to receive it. Just bring it to me. So 1, you got to pray daily. Number 2, position your marriage to win, which means you got to operate in faith and not fear. If someone can put that in the chat box for me, operate in faith and not fear, meaning that you've got to learn to come to your spouse from a position of love and wisdom, and God will give you the wisdom on how to handle those tough conversations. And the third P is persevere, because things may not always go as planned, and we understand that some days are going to be more challenging than others. But when you're covering your relationship in prayer, when you're positioning yourself, meaning you're operating from a place of faith and not fear, when you're operating in love. Come on, we love on people that we see in the church. We love on people that are coming into the church that are hurting. But then when it comes to our spouse, we're like, I can't, no. Why are we giving or demonstrating more love to those strangers sometimes than the ones that we committed to be with for the rest of our lives? God's desire is for us to persevere. And I'm literally always praying for endurance when it comes to my marriage, because there are times where I was tempted to give up. I was like, Lord, this is just too much. God, I can't handle it. God, I don't know what to do. But the amazing thing about God is he says, but I do. And he will tell you. You want to refresh in your marriage? You've got to hear the voice of God for him to tell you, hey, sometimes he'll send you, I just feel laid on my heart, send him a message during the middle of the day. You don't know what he's struggling with in that moment in his job. You don't know what he's struggling with in his business at that moment. So when God starts laying stuff on our heart to do it, we've got to be willing to do that, if that makes sense. So remember the 3 Ps. Number 1, if you're going to go have these tough conversations, pray. Number 2, position yourself. And number 3, persevere. I've encountered so many people that are ready to just throw in the towel because the marriage got rough. It's like we take our wedding rings for rent. We get tired of them. We're like, no, I'm tired of that ring. Throw it in, get a new upgrade, something that's shinier, that appears to be better, but has just as many flaws, as just as many challenges as the one you have. And what you do is you carry that baggage from relationship to relationship. So you got to learn how to resolve those issues. So when you're getting ready to have that conversation, one of the key points, Be present in what your partner is saying. Avoid what we call the jump rope mentality. So you might be listening like, what is the jump rope mentality? I may be dating myself in terms of my age, but do you guys remember when you were younger, there was this little, you would be getting ready to jump double dutch and you're sitting on the side and you're just ready, just waiting for your turn, just right to just jump in and just go show off your skills. But how many of us do that in our relationships with our spouses? They're talking, you're having this conversation, and you got that jump rope mentality. You're just ready to jump in. You're ready to prove them wrong. You're ready to tell them up and down what they did, what they should do, how they did it. And God, it's like, God's like, just slow your roll. God is trying to remind us that you don't have to have that jump rope mentality. You got to learn to be respectful, meaning that you don't operate in high emotions, low intelligence. So if somebody's listening, if somebody could type that in the chat box for me, don't operate in high emotions because it equals low intelligence. I'll say that one more time. Don't operate in high emotions because it equals low intelligence. And what do I say by that? Because we have to learn how to respond versus react. If you could put that for the chat box for me, learn to respond versus react. Because when we're operating in high emotions, everything's about your emotions. You're driven by your emotions. You're not thinking about what you're saying. You're just speaking. You're just angry. You're frustrated. He said something that you didn't want to hear. He did something you didn't appreciate. He forgot the garbage. He forgot to do help with the dishes, help with the kids, or you're just feeling tired and overwhelmed. So then at that moment, you feel like you just snap. And this high emotions, low intelligence, you start spewing things out of anger. And because you're angry, you want him to feel the brunt of that. And what does that do? That causes a wall of division. But we got to learn to rethink these things, lady. That wall that man then uses to protect himself winds up dividing the two of you. So when we're going to have those tough conversations, number one, avoid the jump rope mentality. Number two, be respectful. Remember, don't operate in high emotions because it equals low intelligence. And number three, we got to be honest about how we're feeling. Men are not mind readers. Be honest about your feelings. But let me add this caveat. Put a little star. Everybody make a star with your finger. Put a little star on there. Resist the urge to hit below the belt. And that's something I'm all too familiar with. And I'm sure, I know you might want to put your finger in there, or you might want to look like, no, that's not me. But we have to resist the urge to hit below the belt because we want to hurt them because they've hurt us. Resist that urge. But finally, don't do that. It makes things worse. And I'm sure you're like, Sakeisha, don't just say don't do that. What does it do? It inflicts emotional damage. It causes division. It causes more work. You got that wall building up, because none of us, let's be real, nobody wants to be hurt. So you start doing things to protect yourself, to guard your heart. But what you're doing is eventually causing division. And I'm sure you're like, well, Sakeisha, why do you keep talking about the women this? Because I'm dealing with us and our issues. If my husband were here, we talk about the men's perspective. But today we're going to focus on what we can do. Because remember, we can only change ourselves. We can't change anybody else. So number one, make sure you avoid that jump rope mentality. Number two, be respectful. Number three, be honest. Number four, just make sure that you resist that urge to hit below the belt when you're having a disagreement. And number five, just recognize the need for a pause. Doesn't mean you leave the relationship. I'm talking about a pause in the conversation, meaning when those tempers, that emotions get high, you guys come up with that safe word where you can hit that pause button to know, hey, I got to take the time out because if I go a step further, if I say anything else, I'm going to inflict more damage than good. So recognize when it's time to pause. All right. Which is going to lead me to my next question. How or when or how should I talk about sex with my fiance or my boyfriend? So everybody say, okay, it's going to get hot in here, right? No, let me be honest with you. For those that are actively dating, you do need to have that conversation when you start seeing someone. You need to find out what are your expectations. If this is someone that you're planning to marry, you're someone you're planning to be in a relationship, what are their expectations in regards to sex? Many times as women, we go into these relationships saying, hey, thinking or assuming that they know what we want. And we wind up with unfulfilled sex lives in our marriages, and we want to walk away. We get frustrated. How often are they expecting sex? What type of sex? Some couples are into regular. Some, they have questions and debate about other types of sex. You have to be honest and transparent about what you're looking for. And what you have to do is be receptive. Be receptive to a mindset shift. When you start to have these conversations, it's just not about what you want, it's what he wants. What are the two of you deciding that if we're going forward, if we're married, this is going to be our expectation. But it's something that you do need to know. What happens when we get into relationships? We come in with the expectation, many people are going into relationships being honest. They've had sex a lot of times before marriage. And I'm not saying that that's something I'm encouraging, but I'm being honest about the reality that exists. But what kind of expectations are you bringing into this relationships? Because we have wives that wind up with unfulfilled sex lives because they have not had these communications. What are they expecting? All right, let me be real. When I met my husband, he was very, very experienced. I was not. When we met at Florida A&M University, and that was one a top HBCU. And the thing for FAMU was there's 8 women to 1 man. My husband was there. He was enjoying every 8, his 8 to the 1 man. And then he met me, and things began to shift. But this is the thing. When you go into those types of relationships, he had a certain level of expectation when it came to sex. Why? Because he was experienced. So in his mind, every woman knows how to do this. Every woman is okay with that. And that's not the case, because here you are connecting with a woman who is not experienced like that, who, to be completely honest, half of the things I didn't even know what they were. I'm like, I really need to look this up in the dictionary because I don't even know what this word means. I absolutely had no idea. So you come into the relationship and then there becomes stress and frustration because his sexual needs are not being met. Because he had a certain level of expectation. And poor me, I'm like, I really didn't know what to tell him. But just imagine if we had these conversations before, in regards to what you're expecting, how often you're expecting it, what types. Because I was clueless. I had no idea there were so many different types of sex, if I can be completely transparent with you. So I had to get into this mindset shift. So when you're actively dating, you've got to be receptive to a mindset shift from me to we. What is some things that we are going to agree on? I'm not saying that you should compromise, and I'm not saying that, hear me well. Understand that when you're preparing for marriage, we're going to get married. These are my expectations. I expect sex 3 times a week. I expect regular sex. I expect oral sex. You need to have that understanding, because you don't want to get to a point where you're married and you have an unfulfilled sex life, or it becomes boring because you haven't expressed what you expected. That's one of our key points that we tell clients. You've got to express what you expect. Your partner is not a mind reader. So one of my key points, number 1, be receptive to a mindset shift. Number 2, resist the urge to compromise just to have someone. I have young ladies reaching out to me saying, they're impacted by social media and what others people are doing in order to feel like it's a acceptable relationship. And it's causing confusion. And we have to explain to them, look, just because that's what other people are doing, that doesn't mean that's what's right. And that does not mean that that's your pathway. So you got to have those conversations to make sure the two of you are on the same page. And my last point for this one is just make sure that you recognize and you don't ignore the red flags. Boyfriends, they're not projects. You've got to watch out for different challenges that they display ahead of time. If you're talking about sex, is he aggressive now and you're just dating? Watch for anger issues. Is he angry because you're not wanting to have sex or because you want to abstain? All of those things you have to be mindful of when you're going into these relationships. So when you want to talk to your fiance or your boyfriend about it, Be receptive to a mindset shift, meaning you want to know what he's thinking so you could put the cards on the table. But 2, resist the urge to compromise just to have someone, and recognize and do not ignore. I put that because we can recognize the red flags, but how many of us have ignored it? Oh, thinking once this relationship progresses, things are going to shift, things are going to change, but they don't. Now, for my wives, there's a question. How do I talk to my husband about sex? Now, I'm not sure how many ladies are married versus how many are actively dating, actively waiting, but that's a conversation in and of itself. How do you talk to my husband about sex? And with that, I give you the 3 R's. So if you got your pen and your paper, let's write on it. How do I talk to my husband about sex? You're going to use the 3 R's. Number 1, you got to have the right timing. God gives us wisdom on when to speak about certain things. If you're having an issue, when you want to talk to your husband about sex, meaning it may not be fulfilling, you got to use the right timing. Don't hit him with that the first thing he comes through the door. He's tired from work. You're not making me, as far as, sex life is not fulfilling, and, I'm sexually frustrated. That the timing has got to be right. Meaning that use wisdom. You guys set some time and talk. If it's a Saturday, you go out for lunch, start talking about it. Hey, I noticed sexually X, Y, and Z. We had this show called The Date Night with the Hylicks, and on there we gave couples tips. Start planning the date nights. Start, if you're a woman and you're wondering, hey, I need more excitement in my sex life. Discuss it, on a date night. Start building anticipation. Find out what he's looking for. What are his expectations? What is something that he would like to do differently? Because men are sight stimulated, right? So what can I do that turns you on? Talk to him about it. And if you want more frequency, he's not going to know unless you tell him. There are times for which I called myself initiating many years ago because we hadn't had that conversation. I called myself initiating sex, and for my husband, he was just like, oh, that's what you meant. He's like, why didn't you just say so? I'm sight stimulated. You give me something to look at. I don't need these little kitty handwriting on a napkin with a crayon. You need to straight up tell me what you want and when you want it. And I have no problem fulfilling that obligation. But my timing had to be proper. When we're upset about things, that was not the time to talk about it. During that is not the time to correct it. But I'll tell you what, we had our conversations later on, and I had to let him know, this is my expectation for sex. And he had to tell me the same thing. And then we had to come to an agreement. Hey, look, you want 5-6 times a week. I'm doing 13-hour days. So, okay, how about 2 or 3 times a week? Have that time where you can communicate on what's going to work and meet both of your needs. The second thing was the right tone. When you are approaching your husband when it comes to your sex life, women, we know ways in which to, how do you say that? Ways in which you influence your husband. You know how to get your husband's attention. And it doesn't mean coming at him, fussing, pointing the finger, putting him down, criticizing his performance. Encourage him. Tell him what he does that makes you feel good. Tell him what those pleasurable spots are, what gets you turned on. If you need more foreplay, and it's not demanding, but you know how to talk to him. You know how to give him that look and say, look, honey, when you touch me here, oh, that sends chills down my spine. Oh, when you do this, oh, it just sets me on fire. And you let him know. When you tell your husband what is going to turn you on, you have given him the answers to the test. And in most cases, I say at least 95% of the case, unless there's some kind of issue in terms of, health issues in which they cannot perform, they're on different medications. Some may have some different medical challenges, which we won't go into right now. That might be preventing him from meeting those needs, but you do need to have a conversation so you can find out. And number 3 is the right attitude. The right attitude. Because you want him to know that you want him, you desire sex with him, but you want it to be something that's fulfilling to him as well. So just, make sure that you're writing those down, the 3 R's. Number 1 is going to be the right time. Number 2 is going to be the right tone. And number 3 is going to be the right attitude, because the goal is to find something that's mutually beneficial, that's going to make that a zone where your husband wants to come home, your husband wants to have sex. Now, make sure that when you're doing that, your attitude towards sex, you're receptive, but then hygiene is an important thing. Make sure that you are taking care of your body such that when it's time for those intimate moments, he is properly aroused. So, all right. But a question that many women have after that, how do I tell my husband that he's hurting me when we have sex? Now, that in and of itself can be a challenge. Of course, nobody wants to have those moments with their spouse in which it's painful and it's not a turn on. Is it painful because there's, we're going through menopause, there's vaginal dryness? Is it because there's not enough foreplay? What is going on? Have those questions and those conversations with him. It's not about complaining and saying, look, this may feel a little uncomfortable. Then you let him know what makes you feel comfortable, what will make it more pleasurable if you could use foreplay. Remember, men are sight stimulated. Demonstrate, dress up, get sexy, touch him, rub him. Now remember, the Bible says your body is his body is yours. And show him what makes it more pleasurable for you. But, I want to know if it's painful. We've got to find out, is it a physical issue? Just making sure, ruling out, is it not enough foreplay? Because that's something that could be handled very easily, if that makes sense. Now, another question I do have, or another statement I have in regards to that, is that if it's hurting you when you have sex, is it due to past expectations? Because sometimes when you have someone that's had experience when it comes to sex, that may have been something that he was into, and that may be something that's a turn on for another woman, if I can be completely honest. But you need to have that conversation to find out. All right. So this one, let's talk about another question that usually comes up with many women is, how do I not take abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual, into my marriage? And we talked a lot about the domestic abuse rates going up, especially during the pandemic. And it's a huge concern, because I never in any way, shape, or form, God's telling us if you're being abused, if you're abandoned, if there's adultery, that's definitely grounds for, dissolving the marriage. But I'm not saying, hey, you need to dissolve your marriage. But if you have some past challenges that are unresolved, be it that if you were abused physically, you were abused mentally or emotionally, you have to be able to be transparent with that person if they're going to be your life partner, meaning they're going to be your husband. You need to have those conversations, because you have to be able to deal with it. There are so many times that as women, we try to be so strong for so many people, and try to be strong because we fear that it's going to make it seem as if we're weak because we're transparent. But we got to have those conversations. Do you have sexual balance? Is there a woman there? Many women have been molested in their life. And what does that do? That can impact you going into your marriage. And I'll be transparent with you. I'll use myself. When I was molested when I was 8 years old, and that was an experience that I buried deep down on the inside of me, and just tried to not even think about that situation again. But what I didn't know is later on in life, it would carry on into my marriage, meaning there would be a trigger. If my husband touched me in a certain way, if he said certain things to me, that would give me a flashback or a trigger, and I would automatically push him away. So my husband was taking it as a form of rejection, but I was actually subconsciously protecting myself from what had happened before. And what did that do? It started driving a wedge between us. And because he was feeling My wife doesn't want me anymore. My wife's not attracted to me. No, the fact was there was some emotional baggage, some sexual baggage that I was taking into the relationship that I wasn't even really conscious of. He pointed it out. He said, "How is it whenever I touch you here, you cringe, you push me away? I feel like you're not attracted to me. You don't love me." How many women have heard that from their spouses? And because you're on Zoom, you might just want to do a virtual or kind of write a note there. I get it. But how many times have you heard those words? They feel like you're not attracted. I feel like you don't want me anymore. So we have to take inventory of some of the things that have transpired in our life. For a woman that's been abused physically, have those conversations, because they're going to have to learn to be patient with you, because you can tend to be guarded. Now, I understand, and we always talk about the importance of prayer and then having God in the center of your relationship. But there's something, you'll also hear them talk about in the Bible, how faith without works is dead. You're going through that process. You prayed about it, and then you can also seek counseling on how to handle these situations, steps that you can implement to help you identify those triggers, because action changes things. We can pray all the time saying, okay, God is going to do X, Y, and Z in my marriage. But God is saying, hey, I want to restore your marriage. I want to renew your husband's mind, but I need you to speak to him this way. I need you to do this, but we're refusing to do our part. We're expecting God to show up and wave a magic wand and make everything okay, and we don't have any responsibility. We have to be mindful that it's going to require action as well as our faith. So counseling, I encourage you, it does not make you any less of a person. I've been through counseling. I've been through therapy because I want my marriage to be better. I always wanted to learn and to grow. When we found ourselves in that season where we were trying to decide whether we were going to stay or we were going to go our separate ways, I said we couldn't have been helping all of these people for their marriages and then allow our marriage to fall to the wayside. So we had to learn to put a pause in it, put a pin, and say, you know what? If we're going to serve these people, we want to serve from a pure place. So we've got to make sure that we're implementing the tools and the strategies that we've been teaching. Went into therapy, went into counseling to be able to recognize, identify those triggers, be able to recognize how do we implement them and keep walking through that process until we start to see a change. Now, God will give you wisdom and say, okay, I'm going to pray about shifting my marriage. Absolutely. But then he's going to also say, you want to connect with a pastor or a counselor. These are going to be the tools. God gives us wisdom. Everybody's on this earth for a reason. There are counselors for a reason. There are Christian counselors. There are pastors. Everybody has a role to play. So God's going to connect you with people for a reason. But we've got to be willing to cast pride aside to learn how to handle those situations. So if you're dealing with physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, you've got to make sure that you go through some counseling to be able to handle, to see how to process that, and also have those candid conversations with your spouse so they understand that this is not a form of rejection. This is a process that I'm going through, and I need your support in that. I encourage people to seek help and try to work on being whole before you go into marriage, but also help them understand while we're dating, this is someone that you're going to be with. They have to understand that aspect of your life, because we're all imperfect beings. We all have challenges in our marriage. We all have challenges that we're bringing, our imperfections that we have to deal with. And the person that's going to be with you for the rest of your life, the person you say I do to, they've got to understand that there's parts that come with it, for lack of a better term, and you need to be able to be honest with them, if that makes sense. So my advice to that woman is to do this. Get clear. And I remember we talked about getting clear earlier, and CLEAR is the acronym that I use for my actively dating. Number one, make sure you're ready to write notes on it. Get clear. The C in CLEAR, the C stands for get clarity. Clarity in what you are looking for in a mate. When we're coming into relationships and we have baggage from our past, be it physical, mental abuse, sexual abuse, past hurts and pain, we need to be clear on what it is you're looking for. Sometimes we just want to feel loved. You just want to feel needed, that we start to accept things and we accept less than God's best for us. And that's not what God wants for you. He wants you to have a sense of clarity in what you're looking for. The L in clear stands for love yourself first. There are many times where women and wives that I've spoken with, they're looking for love, but they're looking for someone else to make them feel loved. And of course, you want to feel loved and special, but you have to love yourself first. No one else can complete you. No one else can make you whole. You have to be whole in and of yourself. The E in clear stands for express what you expect. Your spouse is not a mind reader. And if someone could be putting these in the chat for me, that would be great. The C stands for the clarity and what you're looking for. L stands for love yourself. And E stands for express what you expect. Your spouse is not a mind reader. And many times we will find that in relationships, their couples are at odds, because as wives, we tend to be really good at anticipating. How many of us out there are really good at anticipating things? We can anticipate the needs. Oh, wow, family's going to need more milk. Kids are going to be going out of town. I got to get extra this for that. My husband's going to a meeting. I got to make sure that, he tends to forget X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to pack extra things for you. But understand this. We're coming from two totally different people, two totally different individuals. My husband, he's like, look, whatever you need, you tell me, and I get it for you. I, on the other hand, can anticipate his needs. Is he any less of a person because he doesn't think like me? No. We had to have that conversation. Said, look, I'm a man. I think as a man, I'll love you. Whatever you need, I'll get it for you. I'll get it, babe. But I just need you to express it. I just need you to tell me. And here I am frustrated, rolling my eyes like, why don't you know? He's like, I don't. I don't think like you. I don't process things like you do. But I love the heck out of you. And I'll do whatever it takes for you. So we have to be mindful that we've got to express what we expect. And the A in clear stands for allowing yourself time to heal from past hurts and baggage. I mean, far too many times, for my ladies that are actively waiting or actively dating, we're not allowing yourselves an opportunity to heal before we jump into another relationship, because we don't want to be alone. We don't want to feel lonely. We don't want to feel like everyone else is booed up but us. But you got to allow yourself time to heal, because that baggage is still going to impact you going forward. You got to be at the point where you got to recognize your triggers and know how to handle those. And the R stands for resisting the urge to compromise, just to have someone, or just, resisting that urge to just look to someone else to make you happy. You've got to love yourself enough first, and you have got to be happy on your own. Too many times we hear couples are saying, oh, that's my better half. No, you're a whole person before you connect with somebody else. Now, the two of you together, you're two whole people coming together. You're not two half people coming together, two whole people. So that is our advice for our actively waiting and actively dating. And my next point would be to deal with the wives. I have points for the wives. You guys ready? All right. If you are struggling with some of these situations, I've got 5 more points for you. And this is not the get clear method. Number 1, if you really want you want to refresh your marriage, you want to deal with some of these challenges. Number 1, you got to learn to change your perspective. I saw my marriage shift, and I started seeing marriages shift when we learn to change our perspective, meaning we have to learn to step outside the situation. As women, we're looking at, okay, how is this impacting me? But how is this impacting us? How is this impacting the marriage? And what do we need to do? I had to learn to shift my perspective in the way I saw my husband, in the way I honored my husband. And I understand that can be a challenge, because we kind of tend to get on autopilot on how we deal with things. But you got to learn to change your perspective, because things aren't going to always go out according to how we plan, but that doesn't mean that God isn't in the midst of the situation. There are things that he's moving around, he's teaching us, and he's preparing us for things to come. So instead of always, he gets on my nerve, he doesn't do this, how about shifting your perspective and start thanking God for what your spouse does do? The things that he does right. Just think about it. If you start speaking to your spouse, honey, I thank you for this. I thank God that you provide for us. I thank God for the amazing father that you are. I thank God for X, Y, and Z. Start to see that man manifest a different behavior because he knows his wife has got his back and she's speaking life into him, and you will start to see a shift. Now, just be mindful. For us, we like to see immediate manifestation, but we got to understand, just think when we're pregnant, there's something that's taking place on the inside of us that's not immediately noticeable on the outside, but that doesn't mean a transformation isn't taking place on the inside. And the same thing with our relationships. So just making sure we're learning to change our perspective. So the second point is just learn to leverage temporary setbacks to your advantage. Sure, we go through challenges in our relationships and our marriages, but there are things that we don't just go through them, we grow through them. The situation where my husband taught me to pray, well, I don't say, he's the one that told me, go pray. And in my frustration and my anger, I did it, and it was one of the best things that I ever could have done for our marriage. Of course, it was a setback. We were arguing, we were fussing, but it encouraged me to spend more time listening to the voice of God. Listen to what his plans for my life were so that the situation could turn around. Number 3 is just listen to the voice of God in every situation. He's not going to steer us wrong. He says he's never leave you nor forsake you. God is always talking, but are we always listening, or are we operating under our own agenda? So like when we start talking about this conference, the fact that God's agenda prevails, oh my gosh, that's when we start to see real change take place in our relationships and in our marriages. Number 4, you got to look for opportunities for growth. When you need to refresh your marriage, things happen to you. Yes, I went through a molestation in my life. But what did I learn from that? I had to learn to grow in my marriage. Now, when other women are coming to me, when other wives are talking, and they're talking about how they're shutting down and how a husband may say, hey, I feel like my wife's rejecting me. Okay, hold up. Let's freeze frame. Let's talk about this and start to explore that. Now we can recognize certain signs and things that I may not have recognized before. Of course, when you go through training, they'll teach you certain things, but then there's certain things that you just get straight from on the job training, learning as you go through your relationship, learning as you grow. Because the things that we're going through, it's not for us. It's for the people that we're called to serve. God is in the preparation business. He already knows the ending from the beginning. See, it's very easy to go from point A to point B, but God is like, hey, I want to get you from here to here, but it may not be a straight path. My path may not be like my sister to the left or the right. God may take me from here to here to here to circle back here because there's something that I miss over here and here and to get to my final destination. But does it make the destination any less valuable? Absolutely not. But it's God's plan for my life. But are we listening to his voice in the process? And my last point for that is just learning when it's time to pivot. This pandemic has shifted lots of things. It's caused a lot of us to hit the reset button in our marriages, in our businesses, in our relationship. Some people experience a job loss. They experience a loss in a business, a loss of houses and cars. And can I tell you that God's like, I'm still in control. If I did not push you outside of your comfort zone, if this had not happened, you would have still been where you were. But because of this, there's a shift. Can I tell you, I've had other people say, oh, well, because of the pandemic, my husband's around longer and we're getting on each other's nerves. No, some of the things you were simply avoiding, you were simply sweeping them under the rug, but now you're face to face with it. You can't run from it. You can't go have an appointment. You can't go hang out with your friends and get coffee and just leave that thing stirring. There are certain things that you handle. So you had to learn to pivot. You had to learn to communicate. Some of us were so busy with our day-to-day lives, our calendars full with our kids' responsibilities, us working, taking care of family member or friends, that our marriages were on the back burner. And God's like, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that anymore. You guys are face to face here. You're going to spend some time together and learn to deal with those issues in your marriage. For us, it was a blessing. We had an opportunity to grow our business, because I'll share this with you. I said it earlier, I'm a retired pharmacist. And it's not because I really wanted to retire, but when God was telling you, you want to do a refresh in your marriage, we had been helping couples for a long time, 16 years. And I kept saying, God, as a pharmacist, I want to be able to help couples on a regular basis. I want to be able to pour into them and not just be able to help them every other Saturday when I'm off, every other Sunday when I didn't have to serve in ministry, I felt I was doing them a disservice. But he knew I was not leaving a 6-figure job. I was not walking away from my salary. And so when this about 2 years ago, I got very, very sick and had to leave my job and couldn't go back. So God's like, now you're going to really exercise your faith. Now you're going to you're going to truly be prepared for what you prayed for. So this time has been an opportunity. These past 2 years have been amazing to be able to speak to couples in a regular business, to be able to step out on faith, to launch 2 radio shows, to be able to do podcasts and interviews, to be able to pour into other couples like never before. But I had to learn to pivot because it did not come the way I thought it should come. So I'll say with this, sometimes good things fall apart so greater things can come together. Now there are, 1 or 2 other things, but I want to talk about this. Can I still be happy and be married? And my question or my answer is absolutely yes. Do I have those moments where we don't see eye to eye? Absolutely. But there are a few key points. If you want, your marriage can still be happy, but there's certain things you just need to learn or to work on. Number 1 is communication. Communication is key. Learn to express what you expect, because your partner is not a mind reader. The communication process, your God is always speaking, but are we always listening? But we've got to learn to do that to our partner as well. It's really, really important. Number 2, you have to commit to guarding your marriage or your relationship against external influences, meaning establish boundaries. We love our parents, we love our children, but as second to God, your marriage needs to be a priority. And sometimes that falls on the very bottom of our to-do list. Number 3, you got to constantly walk in forgiveness. This is a task that's going to require you to be intentional. And your spouse, it may be challenging sometimes because they may do some things that are considered to be insensitive, frustrating. But you've got to be able to walk in forgiveness, because forgiveness is not about them. It's about you. Sometimes our prayer lives are hindered because we're walking in unforgiveness, holding on to things. And we wonder why it's manifesting in our health, while it's manifesting in certain medical conditions, because we're harboring unforgiveness. And number 4, just control your finances. That's one of the greatest divides in marriages and relationships today, the couples who are not on the same page financially. Make sure that you have those conversations in regards to where you are and where you want to be, and coming up with a plan to do so.